Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
Don't forget the unholy trinity. Me, Aaron Raw, Matt Dillahunty together for a special event with you in Tulsa, Oklahoma, February the 15th at OSU Tulsa Auditorium. And you can get those tickets now at actok.org. That's the atheist community of Tulsa's website, actok.org. So looking forward to getting back on stage with my brothers in heathenry, and it'd be a shame if you missed out. So hope I get a chance to see you there. actok.org for tickets. Today's conversation relates to a specific couple of guys who founded a specific organization that is exposing some clandestine behavior in religious organizations, starting with the Mormon Church, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and now religious institutions and organizations in general. The organization is called the Truth and Transparency Foundation. And so I have its founders joining me for the conversation today, Ryan McKnight and Ethan Dodge. Despite being officially organized in 2017, the work of the Truth and Transparency Foundation began actually much sooner. I say much. A year or so sooner, guys. You guys started with something else. Who wants to start this story for me?
I guess I'll give you the quick, 2-minute, synopsis.
Tell me who I'm talking to. Since
this is Ryan McKnight.
Okay, Ryan.
I had been involved in sort of disseminating some information, not necessarily that I was trying to do it, but, just kind of right place, right time. I was involved in the ex-Mormon, social media community, online community. And so I kind of played a role in disseminating things that ended up being newsworthy. And on Reddit, I kind of garnered sort of this reputation as somebody that could maybe help somebody get news out there, if you will. And in October of 2016, somebody sent me these 15 videos that were these closed circuit recordings of meetings of the top leaders of the Mormon Church. It was basically like their weekly board meeting. And it wasn't a secret recording. It was kind of like a recording where it was like if people who were supposed to be in the meeting weren't there, they could go back and watch it to get caught up. And so this person sent me these videos, said, hey, put them up on YouTube. I've been holding on to them for a couple of years. I put them up. I had watched a couple of them. They were mildly interesting, the ones that I watched. And there was some national newsworthy information in those videos. They blew up. They went viral. I gave more interviews than I could even count over like the course of a week, culminating with a spread in the New York Times about the whole ordeal. And I started getting bombarded with people contacting me, and Ethan and I connected around that time. We didn't know each other prior to that. And, we built a website. Ethan, pretty much built the most important parts of the website, which are the parts that enable people to anonymously submit information, documents, recordings. We use something called Secure Drop, which is used by all the major news outlets. It's kind of one of these things that unless you go out of your way to tell us who you are, you can pretty much protect your anonymity as close to 100% as possible. And so that kind of launched us. We built the website. It was, just to see what would happen. It was called Mormon Leaks at the time. It's mormonleaks.io. That website is still up. If people want to go and look at sort of the historical, they can go back and look at everything we released, starting in basically January of 2017. Not everything we released was, major newsworthy, right? But there were definitely a couple of things that not just made news in Utah, but made national and in some cases international news. And so I mean, that's the quick sort of synopsis. It kind of morphed. We got contacted by people from other religions, and we ended up wanting to expand, to other religions. And we also wanted to start doing our own investigative reporting, because at the time we were just sort of putting the documents out there and letting the press decide, what was important, what wasn't. And we wanted to start writing our own stories. And so that evolution, which we could talk about different aspects of that evolution, some of the stories that led to it, but that evolution kind of went into full gear in the beginning of 2019 when we started writing our own stories.
Let me go back, okay?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Let's talk about these videos. They were, let's call it a business meeting, closed doors type meeting stuff. Somebody obviously who was part of the Mormon church. I don't know, maybe they were on their way out, or they were skeptics, or they were a mole. I don't know who these people were.
I honestly have no idea on that particular one, how that person came into contact with those videos.
And the inflammatory information that was in the videos was about what? Their money? What got international or national attention at the time?
So I'll tell you two things. One of them is sort of minor. The other one was sort of the bigger story. One of the minor ones was, these videos were from even though we released them and I received them in 2016, they were recorded in 2011, 2012, roughly in that time span. And one of them was right on the heels of WikiLeaks coming out, with their initial leak with Chelsea Manning. And one of the videos was a briefing that they received. These videos, they would all these board members, these 12 board members would get briefings from somebody, and there would be a question and answer at the end of it, whatever. And this person gets up and gives a briefing on what WikiLeaks is and whether or not WikiLeaks or a similar type website could have any effect on the church in the future. It was actually a really important and good topic, really. The presenter did a really good job of sort of trying to explain to these old fogies, these 70 and 80-year-old men, this potential threat that was out there. And if you watch the video, when it comes time for the Q&A part, pretty much almost the only thing they talked about was the sexuality of, and they referred to Chelsea Manning as Bradley Manning, because I believe this was before she came out as transgender. But, they were obsessing over the sexuality of Chelsea Manning and speculating about the sexuality of Julian Assange, and talking about how, wondering whether or not the whole thing was part of the gay, what was the term they used, Ethan? Oh, the homosexual agenda, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And so that was, it's no secret that the Mormon church has a problem with their LGBTQ relationship. So that wasn't necessarily front page news. But what was bigger news, probably, at least on the national level, was that one of the videos was a debriefing of a U.S. senator. He was, at the time of the recording, he was a former U.S. senator. He had just left office. His name is Gordon Smith. He was a U.S. senator for the state of Oregon and a Mormon. And so he came and kind of spent an hour talking to these guys about, all the good work that he did in the Senate. He was thanking them for all their help and support. And what was revealed in that, there were kind of two real key things that were revealed in that debriefing. One was that he said that his reason for voting for the Iraq War was that he felt like if the United States could successfully install a democratic, system there, that it would open the door for the Mormon church to go into Iraq. And then they talked about how his office didn't do anything until they got guidance from the church leaders. And they even joked at one point that there was a 6-week period where they hadn't had any communication with their representative from the church or their liaison or whatever they called it. And they were at kind of a standstill on some issue, and they didn't know what to do because they hadn't heard from the church yet. So, and, one of the things that a lot of people pointed out there was, there's obviously a lot of problems with that, right? But one of the things that people, I think, smartly pointed out was that, if he had been a senator from Utah, it might have been a little bit more forgivable, because it's likely that his constituents were, their values and political leanings were in line with the Mormon church, more likely. But as a senator from Oregon, and Oregon has an extremely small percentage of Mormons, it's really hard to say that he was representing his constituency by taking orders from the Mormon church. So it was interesting. That was the main thing that the New York Times latched on, that part of the story.
So is there backlash from the church? Obviously, they realize private videos have gone public. What happened then?
Well, they were silent initially. I mean, they didn't even respond at all. I think there was like just no comments straight off, up and down the board. But I'll let Ethan talk about the first time the church went with the bubble chart. He can tell that story. The first time the church there was backlash, if you will, in air quotes.
That's when I reached out to Ryan and said, hey, I'm a cybersecurity professional. I was like, let me help you protect your sources. And so that's when I came in and I set up SecureDrop like he was saying. And then we launched the site Mormon Leaks in December of 2016. So about 3 years ago. We didn't think it was going to go anywhere, but we got a pretty good leak right off the bat. And we were the first ones to release some concrete documentation that pointed to how much the top Mormon leaders are actually paid, which up until then, it was like kind of even a question whether or not they were paid. So that was pretty cool. And that was one of our very first leaks, and it kind of solidified our legitimacy, at least in the Mormon community. A couple months after that, what Ryan is referring to, he called it a bubble chart. We received this document. It was a PowerPoint presentation, and in the PowerPoint presentation, there was a bubble chart. And at the very bottom of the bubble chart, it had a political scale of left and right. And then there were about 13, 14, maybe 15 bubbles on this chart, and they were of all different sizes. And inside each bubble was a word, and the title of the slide was something like things leading people away from the gospel. That I'm paraphrasing. I don't know exactly what it was, and in each bubble there was something that the church thought was a threat to people's activity in the church. And one of the biggest ones was pornography. There was another one that said secularism, and there were actually 3 or 4 people that were actually called out by name in that document, and almost everybody that was called out by name in that document had been recently excommunicated from the church when we released this. So it was kind of a big deal, but it was also like, it could have easily been fabricated. It was not a very well done PowerPoint. It was ugly as hell, but we released it, and the very next day, the church actually hit us with a DMCA takedown request, which up until this point, they had been completely silent. They had not offered comment on any of our leaks directly. They had offered a comment about the pay of Mormon leaders, but they did not acknowledge the legitimacy of our leak when we released that documentation. But they hit us with a DMCA takedown request, and we immediately made that fact public, and the Streisand effect kicked in full force, and everybody wanted to get their hands on this bubble chart. And then about a week later, we responded to them saying, we're not going to take it down. We have every right to publish this under the fair use doctrine in the United States because it's a journalistic resource and it is newsworthy. And the Washington Post actually picked up that story. And that was kind of the first time that one of our leaks since those videos that Ryan released before I got involved, the first time that something had gotten national attention. And it's all because they wanted it taken down. Otherwise, nobody outside the Mormon community really cared about it.
Check my numbers here. I've got a note that says that in May of 2018, Mormon Leaks compiled public documentation that tied $32 billion to the Mormon Church. Is that a accurate number for 2018?
Yeah, we did do that. Yep. The dollar amount is accurate as of year end 2017, but we published that in 2018.
Have you been following then, I'm sure, the breaking news last month about the Mormon Church having $100 billion in accounts supposedly earmarked for charity, etc., but instead they were kind of being stockpiled in the church's accounts? I know that there was a whistleblower in that case. The guy was actually a Mormon. He worked for the church until September of last year. You've been following that story?
Well, I mean, not only have we been following it, but as often happens in this business, we pretty much got scooped on that. We were pretty close to breaking that story, I think. I mean, we knew about it. We knew it was coming, and we were trying to get our ducks in a row to be able to break that story, but it didn't happen. But so we're very familiar with that. And the $100 or so billion that, he's sort of been able to document pretty well. The $32 billion that we revealed is part of that. It's from the same fund.
The party line by the Mormon Church is that their clergy are not paid. Like they're compensated, I guess, in some other way. Is that right? Well,
what it's a word game. It's semantics. I mean, because their local clergy, their lower level clergy are not paid. Okay, so they'll just say that they have no paid clergy, and they'll kind of forget that caveat, and then when people find out, they're just saying like, well, yeah, we were talking about the local people the whole time. You know what I mean? It's kind of like one of those things.
Talking here with Ryan McKnight and Ethan Dodge, founders of the Truth and Transparency Foundation at truthandtransparency.org. You guys went from Mormon leaks to faith leaks, right? You said you expanded the umbrella to include all religion.
That's correct. Yep.
I have to ask, I guess, about the legality of all this. I mean, are you hacking into people's lives? Are you doing illegal things to obtain the information?
We're not doing anything different than a normal newsroom does. We are a nonprofit newsroom dedicated to promoting transparency within religious institutions. We are reporters soliciting sources, working with sources to break these stories, and we're digging into public documentation or anything that we can get our hands on. But to answer your question in short, are we doing anything illegal? Absolutely not. We are just using the same resources that any other journalist would use at their disposal. Now, you can make an argument that how the documents that we've received have been obtained may be unethical, or that it might be in a gray area of ethics, and that's fine. But so are half the documents that ProPublica, the Washington Post, and New York Times, and all these investigative newsrooms also release, right? For instance, ProPublica just in 2019, I think, released like 3 or 4 tapes that came out of ICE facilities, right? That you could argue that those were obtained in questionable ways as well.
And they're in the public interest, and it's a need-to-know type thing. I mean,
exactly.
I'm thinking of, classic whistleblower terminology, right? Whenever the whistleblower goes
and we're
to
not involved in the actual obtaining of the documents. People come to us after they've obtained the documents. So, and sometimes, I mean, I never really ask how they got the documents unless it's part of the verification process, which I'm usually able to go through the verification process without that. Unless somebody tells me how they got the documents, I sometimes don't know. It's we're not. I actually one time, this is a long time ago, I actually had somebody, tell me that they had an opportunity to sort of what was probably illegal. I don't even know if it was legal or not, but I mean, it was definitely a shady way to access the church's network. And, they asked me if they should do it and what they should look for to send us. And I said, don't do it. That was my response to them, so, I mean, we're not involved in getting the documents.
Talking about material provided by other people, let's talk about this recording from the guy, Sean Escobar. This is a story that you guys have been all around, and I'll leave it to you to give us the details. Sean Escobar is who and what happened?
This was probably our most impactful story to date. I got contacted by Sean in late 2018, and he had a recording of... So there's a guy named Sterling Van Wagenen, which most of your listeners have probably never heard of him, but he is a co-founder of the Sundance Film Festival with Robert Redford back in the 70s. Robert Redford was married to his cousin, and that's kind of how they knew each other. And they were both in the film industry, and they started it. Now, Redford, went on to have a much more sort of prominent and successful career than Van Wagenen, obviously, as he's a household name, and Van Wagenen isn't. But Van Wagenen did. He had a movie back in the early 80s where the lead actress won an Academy Award. I mean, so he's done a few things here and there that have, been significant, but most of his professional work relates to Mormon cinema over the year, 80s and 90s mostly, but also in the 2000s. He has directed and produced a number of films that are many of them are actually financed by the church. Some of them are just Mormon related, not necessarily directly tied to the church. But he also, in about 5 or 6 years ago, he directed two movies. Was it 2 or 3, Ethan, the Temple movies? I can't remember.
It was 3.
Was it 3 of them? Yeah, there were 3 movies which they show inside the the mysterious Mormon temple, not the chapels, but the actual temples that like nobody's allowed into unless you have the special card or whatever. In there, one of the things people do is they go through this sort of they call it an endowment session where it's kind of an educational thing. You learn about you learn I don't even know how to describe what it is, but the teaching part of it is largely assisted through this movie with actors. They enact things, and he directed these movies, and this is like one of the most sacred sort of ceremonies within the Mormon Church, if you will, the endowment ceremony. So he also was worked in the film department at BYU for many years. He was the I can't remember what his exact title was, but he was like the director of BYU TV. That might have been his exact title, but he was like one of the top executives at BYU TV. Within the Mormon Church, he enjoyed a very sort of successful and prestigious life within the Mormon Church. People who followed Mormon cinema back in the 80s and 90s knew who this guy was. Sean Escobar, his family lived in the same congregation that Sterling Van Wagenen lived in when he was a young teenager, 12, 13 years old. And Sterling Van Wagenen has kids Sean's age, and so they were friends and with sleepovers and whatnot. And one night at a sleepover, Sterling Van Wagenen, this was when Sean was 13, and this was back in the early 90s, he molested Sean. And Sean never really dealt with it the way it should have been dealt with. He never got the therapeutic help. So he's been suffering with this, for 20 plus years. And he went and, as sort of an attempt to seek closure, went and met with Van Wagenen. And Van Wagenen, to his surprise, actually, he agreed to meet with him. And he recorded the conversation. And Van Wagenen did not hold back, completely confessed the whole thing. He didn't even try to sugarcoat it, really. I mean, some people might say there was a little sugarcoating going on, but I mean, he pretty much just admitted the whole thing. And so Sean contacts him with this tape. Van Wagenen had told his church leader about it, and the church leaders encouraged him to go to the police, but they didn't really do anything else. Sean had been under the impression this whole time that Van Wagenen did not actually go to the police. And we were able to locate the police report from 1993 that showed he did go to the police, and basically nothing got done. At the time, they talked to Sean's parents. Most likely, Sean didn't even know this happened. And his parents told the police that they preferred to support Van Wagenen in getting help as opposed to pressing charges. And back then, it was a little bit of a different environment, and the police took the victim's parents' wishes into consideration more than they would maybe today, especially when he actually confessed. I mean, in the police report, it says that he confessed to doing it. So
okay. So to make sure I understand,
yeah,
Sean Escobar actually filed the police report or went to the police?
No. Van Wagenen went to the police himself.
Van Wagenen went to the police
at the behest of his local leader. Sean, up until we published the story, did not know that Van Wagenen went to the police.
He went to confess.
He went to confess. It's unclear exactly why he did it. I mean, there is some indication as to why he did it. I think it was in one of the police reports or one of the documents that referenced the fact that he had talked to his therapist. It's very possible he told his therapist, and his therapist said, "You have to go, otherwise I have to call," because therapists are mandatory reporters. But we don't know. We don't know exactly.
All you know is that he did go to the police and make a report.
According to Van Wagenen, he did it because his church leader encouraged him to.
And we do know that literally 1 or 2 months after he turned himself in, that is when he started working at BYU as well.
That's the big thing, is that he went on after that incident, after confessing to his church leader, to be hired by the church to do what most would consider to have some prestigious employment positions. Now, we don't know if the corporate church entity knew. It is possible that his local leadership just sort of said, "Hey, we'll just keep this quiet. We're not even going to do the paperwork, and notify quote unquote corporate." But it's possible they knew and ignored it. It's possible that the local leaders kept it from the higher ups. We don't know. But either way, obviously the system failed.
It's very common for cults like this to enable sexual abuse of their congregants.
Yeah, and I don't mean to cut you off, but even more important than all of that, it was important for us and Sean to sort of get this out there and show that even these trusted people of privilege and prestige are, can't always necessarily be trusted. But a young girl saw our story and heard the tape. And I believe at the time she may have been around 13 or so, 13 or 14. And she went to her parents and said, he did this to me a couple years ago when I was 9 years old. And they went to the police. And luckily, Van Wagenen didn't even fight it. He accepted the charges and pled guilty. And he is now sitting in prison. He did negotiate with his plea agreement as maybe a lighter sentence than he otherwise would have gotten, but he got 6 years to life was his sentence. He's eligible for parole after 6 years. The judge in the case, Ethan and I flew out to Utah and attended the sentencing. And the judge in the case actually, because Van Wagenen it was kind of like a one of those like non-apology apologies. His statement was just really very off-putting. And the judge sensed it, I think. And the judge said that he made like a formal recommendation on the record that the parole board in 6 years not grant him parole at the earliest date, that they make sure he serves more than the minimum. And who knows whether or not they'll follow that recommendation. But yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily want to say that all happened just because of us, but we definitely played a role in that. And I think I can speak for Ethan as well on this. It was very gratifying to see that our hard work on that, paid off that way. And even though, it would have been better that none of that ever happened to either one of those two people, at least, we were able to help them get some justice in it all.
You guys then were sort of the conduit for the information, helping to bring it to light, to expose the wrongdoing so that the guilty could be held accountable. Would that be an accurate way to say that's what you do? Yeah.
I mean, like I said, we're a nonprofit newsroom, and we like to, with a mission to hold religious power to account, is essentially what that sums up our mission pretty well.
Short break. When I come back, we're going to talk about a specific story that Ryan McKnight and Ethan Dodge were involved in regarding the revelation of sexual abuse within the Jehovah's Witnesses. So we'll get into that story with my special guests right after this. How does Harry's tie into your New Year's resolution? Well, when it comes to saving money, razors can be expensive, like really expensive. But at just $2 a cartridge, Harry's saves you money all year long. And taking better care of yourself? Well, Harry's award-winning razors and grooming essentials are just a great option for you. Harry's razors are part of my morning routine. They're in my travel kit when I'm out on the road. They're often the gifts I give on special occasions. Because Harry's doesn't do gimmicks. Harry's does quality craftsmanship at a fair price, with blades made in a world-class German factory, ergonomic handle design, no middleman markups, and a 100% quality guarantee. Harry's wants you to start the new year right. New customers get $5 off a Harry's trial set when you go to harrys.com/thethinkingatheist. If you don't absolutely love your shave, Harry's will give you a full refund, so you're totally covered. Harry's has a special offer for listeners of my show. New customers get $5 off a trial set at harrys.com/thethinkingatheist. You'll get a 5-blade razor, weighted handle, foaming shave gel with aloe, and a travel cover. Join the millions of guys who've already switched and go to harrys.com/thethinkingatheist to claim your offer. Talking here with Ryan McKnight, Ethan Dodge. They are founders of the Truth and Transparency Foundation, working with whistleblowers, people behind the scenes, to reveal what is often hidden by religious institutions. There is a pattern of cover-ups. Unfortunately, churches we had a molestation case in my home city of Tulsa, and it was let's see, the church decided they wanted to first deal with things internally, right? Which means nobody calls the cops, and they pat everybody on the head, any concerned parents, and say that they're dealing with it in prayer and all of this. And of course, the pattern of abuse continues until it finally came to light. And that person is now in prison, I think, for the rest of his life. But especially in religions and cults, we see the enabling of abusers. We see a culture where the abusers are often protected, oftentimes for the protection of the reputation of the church. This was the case with the Jehovah's Witnesses. You guys were involved in a sexual abuse investigation on that score. Do you want to flesh that out for me?
Yeah. So this was our first release outside of Mormonism, and this came in January 2018, I believe. And what it was a series of letters. It was 69 pages, and I believe like 13, 14 letters, something like that. And it was letters between a congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses in Massachusetts and the Watchtower, which the Watchtower is the governing organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. It is their top leadership, right? And essentially what the elders, so every congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses have a body of elders, and that's usually like 6 to 9 elders that are the leaders of that congregation. And the elders in that particular congregation wrote to Watchtower and said, hey, look, we got this guy who has abused sexually multiple little girls, including his daughters, in our congregation. How do we handle this? And as the story unfolds and how they handle it, they detail the notes that they took during their interviews with these girls, the internal court proceedings in these letters and whatnot, and as well as directions coming from the top leaders of exactly how to handle it. And I mean, there's no sugarcoating it. They covered it up, right? I mean, in Jehovah's Witnesses, they believe that any organization that is not theirs is corrupt. Right. That's a very strong belief held by them, especially government organizations. So they don't report anything to the police. They handle everything internally. That was our first big release outside of Mormonism. And that made international news because the Jehovah's Witnesses have such a strong international presence, especially in Europe. Ryan and I both gave interviews in Spanish for that story, actually.
I mean, are they threatening to shut you down? Are they talking litigation? I mean, you guys are saying, or at least releasing some pretty heavy stuff about a pretty powerful religious organization. What happened?
Yeah, so they've never responded to any of our requests for comment, neither the Mormon Church or Jehovah's Witnesses. However, there was a website, and still is a website, called avoidjdub.org. And this guy who runs the website, his name is Jason Wynn. This is all public information. And what happened was he did essentially what we were doing with Mormon Leaks and Faith Leaks with Jehovah's Witness documents. And the J-Dubs came after him and said, hey, take down your stuff, take down these documents, or we're going to sue you. And he is not located in the United States, and so he doesn't quite have the rigor of the First Amendment that we do. Not that they don't have free speech over there in Europe, but the First Amendment cases tend to go better for the person exercising their free speech here in the United States. And we had successfully defended ourselves, and nothing that we had ever done in terms of copyright infringement or fair use had ever actually gone to court, but we had fought off several frivolous threats. And he said, hey, look, can you take all these documents that I have on my website and put them on your website? And we said, yep, we will. And so we started putting them all up there slowly. And they were up there. I had probably about 75% of those documents up. There was tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of them. He actually came out publicly with his identity. Before this, he was doing this all anonymously, and this was actually New Year's Eve, if I remember correctly, or around that time of 2018. He came out publicly in a Norwegian newspaper. That this Norwegian newspaper did a profile on him. He stated his name. He went on the record. He told us that he got us the documents, came out as our source of these documents. And that same day, Watchtower hit us with 4 takedown requests. To which we responded to all four of them saying we have every right to publish these under the fair use. They are newsworthy, and we haven't heard from them since. So that's the extent of our communication with them.
Talking here with Ryan McKnight and Ethan Dodge, founders of the Truth and Transparency Foundation. There's a mission statement about what the organization is, what it does. It boils down to 3 major points. I'm going to paraphrase, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, okay? But here's what I got from your mission statement page. Number 1, most religious institutions are not financially transparent. They are nonprofit organizations that get to play by essentially a different set of rules because they're playing their religion card. People, and you include people in the church membership and affiliates of the church, those people deserve to know where the money is going and how it is used. Number 2, church policy is often an excuse for institutionalized bigotry and oppression. Many church policies are intentionally vague in language, but they are specifically discriminatory in practice. And 3, protections for the church often enable abuse and protect abusers because the people involved are hidden behind a religious shield which hides destructive, abusive, and corrupt behavior from the public. That includes, again, the followers of the religion itself. There's a line on your website. It says, we aim to achieve our mission by enabling whistleblowers. How'd I do on the mission statement?
Sounds pretty good. I think you took a little more liberty than I would have, but that you have every right to do that.
I mean, you tell me. I mean, we're talking about an organization. I mean, religious organizations really often do get preferential treatment. And people are often afraid to criticize or afraid to do the investigative reporting for fear of feeling or appearing to be anti-religion. And religion often knows this, right?
Yeah, and I think you bring up a fair point. We often get accused of being biased against religion, and me and Ryan and I mean, if you take 5 minutes to research us on the internet, you'll know that neither of us believe in God. Both of us aren't very religious. We were both raised Mormon and no longer are Mormon. And so a lot of people accuse us of being biased, that we can't do this, that we can't write a fair assessment, right? And especially with those things that you just paraphrased on our site, saying that we are assuming that most religious organizations are not transparent with their finances, and we have the personal and organizational belief that religions need to be more transparent and that their members have a right to know where their money that they're donating to that organization is going. It's no secret that it's no secret that many religious institutions do enable sexual abusers, as you have said, and abuse on an emotional level, on an ecclesiastical level, on a physical level, right? And essentially, we are operating on those base assumptions, and if we're biased because we're operating on those base assumptions, so be it. But every newsroom in the world has to make some sort of assumptions to start their work, right? And that's where we start ours.
Ryan, what are you guys looking for now? I mean, are your doors open to other people who see some shaky stuff going on behind these church doors? Do you want other people to bring their stories forward? What's the deal?
Yeah. Well, we of course are always happy to be contacted by people who, feel they may have something to share. News, obviously, I'm not going to guarantee that everything you send me is going to get published, but we're definitely happy to take a look. We're in a real big sort of fundraising phase right now. So, I mean, funds are definitely needed. We've been existing on fumes, financial fumes up to this point. It is starting to get a little bit untenable on that front. The doors aren't closing yet, but
now, what are the funds used for? That's the first question that will be asked.
Yeah, sure. And I will give you a little sort of rundown of that. But if anybody wants something more specific, I'm happy to take any kind of phone call or email if they want to get into real specifics on the money, how it's used. But first, I'll say, neither Ethan or I are paid. I mean, even if we wanted to get paid, the money doesn't exist to get paid. Okay. So we do this in our free time. We both have full-time jobs and families. The money that we have received up to this point has gone largely to maintaining the website, which, depending on the traffic in a given month, can obviously be different prices or whatever. And there's obviously all kinds of other costs that go into maintaining a website. There has been over the last 3.5 years, some travel costs here and there that the money is paid for. And that's basically what it gets, subscriptions to various different sort of services that we need to assist in our, sort of investigations and whatnot. So that's kind of the basic things that the money's used for. But like I said, if anybody, our finances are on our website. You can look at our 990s from the past years, and I think it's like the last page or somewhere towards the end of the 990, there's a kind of a breakdown of the different categories the money was spent in. And again, I'm happy to take people who want to email me or call me and get much more nitty-gritty specifics on that. What the problem we're running into right now, as far as money goes, is as we grow and as our reach is growing and our stories are becoming more noticed, we have a real need for things like liability insurance. Not that we're going to go publish something that's not true, but as you can imagine, when you're printing unfavorable things about powerful organizations, sometimes just throwing money at a potential lawsuit is enough to squash a small bug like us. And so we need to put in some infrastructure in regards to that, and that costs money. We want to grow as far as hiring, let's say, freelance reporters and things like that, and being able to pay people. We don't have the funds to do that right now. Things like that will help us get more stories, get more reach, things like that. So, if anybody thinks that what we're doing is worthy of a couple of dollars, they can visit our website and click on the donate button. I mean, we are going to keep doing this for as long as we can, regardless of, where the funds are, but we are being held back right now because of funding. There's so much more that we could be doing.
Any final thoughts from either of you on the Truth and Transparency Foundation?
Just thanks so much for having us on, Seth, and we really appreciate it. We are very passionate about what we're doing, and we are confident that we could be doing a whole lot more. Like Ryan said, we just need the funding. We have plans. We are literally sitting on thousands of documents and dozens of stories, and we are just waiting to publish those. We've been operating without liability insurance this whole time, and now that we're starting to bring other people on board in the organization, we can't afford to do that anymore for everybody's sake of their livelihood, right? So anyway, thank you so much. We have big plans in the future, but we can't do them without funding.
I appreciate both of you. Thanks for being a part of the conversation. We are going to follow your work, the website truthandtransparency.org. Ryan McKnight, Ethan Dodge, all my best to you and yours, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.